Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Tuesday, May 16th, 2023. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today, Ukraine aid to be exhausted by mid-summer. So the last massive aid package that Congress authorized for Ukraine has about $6 billion left, which is expected to be used up by mid-summer. And this was reported by Politico on Monday. So far, the U.S. has authorized about $113 billion in spending on the war in Ukraine, which includes military aid, this assistance that they call direct budgetary aid, which is billions that they just hand directly to the Ukrainian government. It also includes money for training, funding for U.S. troop deployments in Eastern Europe, and other types of assistance. So once the final $6 billion dries up, the Pentagon will not be able to ship more weapons to Ukraine. That means that the White House is expected to ask Congress to authorize more spending on the war soon. A senior Biden administration official told Politico that the White House is discussing a new package and is going to time it so that the weapons can keep flowing to Ukraine uninterrupted. The official said that the administration is fully committed to supporting Kiev in the war for the long haul, which we've been hearing that all along here, as long as it takes. The Political report said that massive aid packages for Ukraine might not be as easy to ram through Congress as they were before, citing the debate over the debt ceiling and dissent from a small but significant group of Republicans. But unfortunately, the majority of Republicans still support arming Ukraine, including GOP leadership, and GOP leaders have been very critical of President Biden for not sending longer range weapons and fighter jets. Leadership in Congress, I mean. So this report had a quote from Lindsey Graham kind of saying the same thing. He said, quote, "Although there are dissenting voices, the large majority of certainly Republicans, for sure in the Senate and arguably in the House as well, believe strongly that we need Ukraine to win and that the outcome there is something that matters not only to that region, but to the United States and our national security interests." End quote. And on the Democrat side, there was virtually no opposition to arming Ukraine. And while there is still strong support in Congress for funding this war, hawks in Washington are concerned that it could decline, that this support could decline if Ukraine's long-awaited counteroffensive fails. This might sound like, it's good news that they're running out of money that they can spend on this war. But I do think if the White House asks for more, they're probably going to get it. And maybe they're not going to pass a huge $40 billion aid package, but it could still be a pretty significant amount of money. So they might be preparing to ask for it soon if they think they're going to run out by July, May, June. Yeah, so that's coming up. I wouldn't be surprised if we see them make a request soon. All right, the next one here. Zelensky visits the UK and Sunak expresses support for fighter jets. So Zelensky visited Britain on Monday and secured pledges for more military equipment from London, including air defense missiles and long-range attack drones. British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak also expressed support for giving Ukraine Western-made fighter jets. So according to Sunak's office, the attack drones that they're going to provide have a range of about 124 miles. And Zelensky's visit came after the British became the first NATO country to provide Kiev with longer-range cruise missiles. And they're sending them the Storm Shadow missiles, which apparently are already being used by the Ukrainians, according to the Russians. The Russians said on Monday that they intercepted one of these Storm Shadow missiles that can hit targets up to 155 miles away. So the UK's pledge to send more arms to Kiev drew an angry response from Moscow. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said, quote, "Britain aspires to be at the forefront among countries that continue to pump weapons into Ukraine. We repeat once again, it cannot yield any drastic and fundamental influence on the way the special military operation is unfolding, but definitely it leads to further destruction, further action. It makes this whole story for Ukraine much more complicated, end quote. So basically saying that the more Western military aid being sent into Ukraine, it's going to prolong the war, which is something Russia has been saying all along here. So Zelensky, while he was in the UK, he inquired about the possibility of Ukraine receiving Western-made fighter jets. Zelensky said after his meeting with Sunak that he was feeling very positive about creating a jets coalition, which he expects to happen in the closest time. So while Ukraine has yet to receive a promise of Western aircraft, the British are laying the groundwork for that eventuality. So Sunak's office said in a press release, quote, "This summer we will commence an elementary flying phase for cohorts of Ukrainian pilots to learn basic training. This training goes hand in hand with UK efforts to work with other countries on providing F-16 jets, Ukraine's fighter jets of choice," end quote. So the British are saying that they're going to push to get Ukraine F-16s, American-made F-16s. And Sunak said that he's going to help rally other countries to get these fighter jets over there. He said, quote, "Other countries are involved. I'm talking to those leaders. I'll be doing more of that this week in my international engagements. We're very keen to build that coalition of countries to give Zelensky and his people the aircraft support they need," end quote. So Zelensky's visit to the UK, it wrapped up a tour of Europe. He wrote on Twitter on his way back to Ukraine, quote, "Italy, Germany, France, Great Britain, we are returning home with new defense packages, more new and powerful weapons for the front line, more protection for our people from Russian terror, more political support," end quote. So he was in France before he was in the UK, and while he was there, Macron promised more military aid, including light tanks and armored vehicles. And in Germany, Zelensky and German Chancellor Olaf Scholz discussed a massive $2.9 billion weapons package that Berlin has announced it will send to Ukraine. So lots of more pledges for military support. All right, the next one here, this is from Kyle Anzalone over at the Libertarian Institute. The G7 to adopt highly symbolic ban on Russian oil imports. U.S. lacks support for embargo. So the leaders of the group of seven will adopt a prohibition on restarting oil imports from Russia, according to the Financial Times. The highly symbolic ban is well short of the total export embargo proposed by Washington. President Joe Biden will meet with other leaders of G7 nations, Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, the UK, the US, and the EU this weekend in Japan. In the run-up to the summit, American officials lobbied the bloc to agree to an embargo of Russia during the summit. Financial Times reports that a draft of the statement that will be signed at the summit only adopts a highly symbolic ban on resuming imports from Russian oil. Resuming imports of Russian oil from sources that the Kremlin has shut down. And I believe gas is included too in this. One official told the outlet that the move was to make sure that partners don't change their minds in a hypothetical future. While Washington sought a total ban on exports to Russia by the G7, Financial Times reported 2 weeks ago that Japan and the EU viewed the embargo as simply not doable. So, yeah, the U.S. is definitely getting something well short of what they wanted. They wanted to put a complete export ban on Russia, but it doesn't look like that's going to happen. All right. The next one here is another one from the Libertarian Institute. This is from Connor Freeman. Poland to deploy HIMARS near the Russian border. So Poland has received its first shipment of the U.S.-made high-mobility artillery rocket systems, which are the HIMARS that the U.S. has been arming Ukraine with, and these are manufactured by Lockheed Martin. And Poland announced that they will deploy the launchers near the country's shared border with Kaliningrad, which is the Russian enclave in Europe between Poland and Lithuania. So, it's Russian territory. It's not like it's, it's like Alaska is to the United States. It's part of Russia. It's just not connected to the Russian mainland. So in March, the Polish Defense Ministry announced that they will be purchasing these HIMARS, and they're going to have a range of nearly 200 miles. So they're going to get the longer range munitions for them. They're going to be placed within 50 miles of the border with Kaliningrad. So, and again, that Russian enclave, Kaliningrad, it is sandwiched between two NATO members, Poland and Lithuania. Poland's defense minister said, quote, "This weapon will be deployed in the northeastern part of our country. Its task will be to deter the aggressor," end quote. And this official said that the war in Ukraine has demonstrated both the key role of artillery and the value of the HIMARS themselves. And Poland is seeking 500 units, 500 launchers, HIMARS launchers. That is a lot. That's big money for Lockheed Martin. The Polish government also plans to establish a HIMARS academy for other NATO members that plan on acquiring or already possessed the advanced artillery systems. So Poland has spent $414 million to purchase 20 HIMARS, including training launchers with ammo, other equipment, as well as logistics and training. And that was a contract signed in 2019. And this shipment represents the first batch out of the 4-year-old deal. Warsaw is currently spending billions on weapons, including on American fighter jets to replace their Soviet-era MiGs. And Kyle mentions that Poland was the first NATO country to take that big escalatory step to send fighter jets to Ukraine. They still haven't received Western-made fighter jets, but Poland sent their MiG-29s over there, Soviet-made jets. All right. So the next one here, Wagner chief denies offering Ukraine Russian troop positions. So Prigozhin, the head of the Wagner mercenary group, has responded directly to that Washington Post report that claimed that he offered Russian troop positions to Ukraine in exchange for a Ukrainian withdrawal from Bakhmut. Prigozhin said, quote, "Reading this, is of course nice. It means I am not only fighting for Russia, but Zelensky is also fulfilling my orders. This is laughable," end quote. So he laughed it off. And this report from the Washington Post, it cited previously unreported Discord leaks, but the full documents were not published. And, I think we shouldn't really be trusting the Washington Post and the New York Times on this, because what happened with those Discord leaks is that the first batch that showed up on the internet were kind of easy to find. A lot of people got their hands on them. And then the Post and the New York Times helped, track down the leaker. And they said, oh, there's a lot of these documents. I forget the exact number, but there's a lot more of them that other people haven't seen that, the Washington Post and the New York Times are now selectively reporting on. So it's not completely transparent. So this report said that Prigozhin had contacts with Ukraine's military intelligence directorate and met with Ukrainian intelligence officials in Africa. Prigozhin said, quote, "I can say with confidence, if we're being serious, that I have not been in Africa at least since the beginning of the conflict, but in fact, a few months before the start of the special military operation," end quote. Moscow, Russia also dismissed the reporting. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov called it just another hoax. Zelensky, and I just mentioned the story I went over yesterday that was, briefly removed from the Washington Post. This interview with Zelensky that was published on Saturday. It's a very long interview. Part of it, the Post asked him about these alleged contacts between Ukrainian intelligence and Prigozhin, and he got pretty upset. It was a testy exchange. The Washington Post pulled that out, but then they actually put it back in on Sunday night. So that full interview is restored as of Monday. But in that interview, Zelensky got angry and he demanded, the Post reveal how they found out this information, saying it was a felony in Ukraine to discuss it. And he accused the paper of helping Russia. All right. So the next one here. So this is a big report from Brown University's Costs of War project. And they put out this report that says the indirect deaths in the post 9/11 wars number 3.6 to 3.7 million. And if you include the direct deaths, meaning people killed in violence, which is over 900,000, according to their count, the total goes up to 4.5 to 4.6 million. So 4.5 million people killed in post 9/11 war zones in countries that the U.S. waged war in after 9/11, basically, the terror wars as we know them. And this includes Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iraq, Syria, and Yemen. So this report, here, let me just read their brief summary of it here, because they talk about kind of the numbers and how it's not, an exact estimate, and because it is very hard to judge these sort of things, because when we talk about indirect deaths, of course, there's starvation, disease, displacement, all sorts of things that can lead to deaths. So war's destruction of economies, public services, infrastructure, and the environment leads to deaths that occur long after bombs drop and grow in scale over time. This report reviews the latest research to examine the causal pathways that have led to an estimated 3.6 to 3.7 million indirect deaths in post-9/11 war zones, including Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iraq, Syria, and Yemen. The total death toll in these war zones could be at least 4.5 to 4.6 million and counting, though the precise mortality figure remains unknown. Some people were killed in the fighting, but far more, especially children, have been killed by the reverberating effects of war, such as the spread of disease. The report examines the devastating toll of war on human health, whoever the combatant, whatever the compounding factor in the most violent conflicts in which the U.S. government has been engaged in the name of counterterrorism since September 11th, 2001. Rather than teasing apart who, what, or when is to blame, this report shows that post-9/11 wars are implicated in many kinds of deaths, making clear that the impacts of war's ongoing violence are so vast and complex that they are unquantifiable. In laying out how the post-9/11 wars have led to illness and indirect deaths, the report's goals is to build greater awareness of the fuller human costs of these wars and support calls for the United States and other governments to alleviate the ongoing losses and suffering of millions in current and former war zones. And so, again, they talk about Syria and Afghanistan, and the situation right now, since the U.S. left Afghanistan, they've kept sanctions on the country, and people are seriously facing food shortages there. So the situation, from what I understand, is really horrific right now in Afghanistan. And of course, the war, 20 years of war, the U.S. pulling out and seizing the central bank funds and keeping sanctions on the country is all contributing to the situation there. And it's definitely going to lead to lots of deaths. And in Syria, as I'm always covering, the sanctions that are specifically designed to prevent the country's reconstruction, that's going to, there's going to be excess deaths there because of those policies. And so these are things that people don't really talk about, these indirect deaths. So I think it's important. And you could go read the full report if you click on this link here. All right. So the next one here, the terror wars are not over. And this story shows that the U.S. military is probing reports that it killed a civilian in a recent Syrian airstrike. So I went over this airstrike when it first happened, and it was pretty clear initially that a civilian was likely killed. So the U.S. military says that it is looking into reports that it killed a civilian in a recent airstrike it launched in northwest Syria. When U.S. Central Command first reported the strike on May 3rd, the command claimed that it killed a senior al-Qaeda leader, but CENTCOM did not name the person and released very little detail about the strike. Reports immediately surfaced that the strike hit a farm and killed a civilian in Syria's northwestern Idlib province. According to the UK-based Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, the U.S. launched a drone strike that killed Lutfi Hassan Masto, who is a 60-year-old sheep herder not affiliated with any militant group. So the Associated Press spoke with his brother, who said the claims that the 60-year-old was affiliated with al-Qaeda were lies. He said, quote, "He had nothing to do with the revolution. He had nothing to do with the al-Nusra Front or with the Islamic State," end quote. And AP also spoke with Masto's neighbor, who said, quote, the man was a civilian. He had a farm with poultry, cows, and sheep, end quote. So Major John Moore, who's a spokesman for CENTCOM, he said that the command is trying to confirm the identity of the person they killed. He said, quote, "We are aware of the allegations of a civilian casualty, and the outcome of the confirmation process will inform if further investigation is necessary and how it should proceed," end quote. So the U.S. military is notorious for undercounting civilian casualties or lying about them. The Pentagon is also known for investigating itself and finding no wrongdoing, even in instances of significant civilian deaths, such as the August 2021 Kabul drone strike that killed 10 civilians, including 7 children. The Pentagon found, no, we didn't do anything wrong. Nobody was punished for that. So there will probably be a similar situation here. And I think this goes to show, that they do lie, because they put out a press release, again, with very little information, but they said, we killed an Al-Qaeda leader, trust us. But it turns out that is very likely not the case in this situation. And this story has received virtually no attention. I actually, I was trying to follow this story closely. And what I used here, this AP news story, was from last week. It was from May 9th, actually, with these quotes from this guy's brother. This is his brother here in this picture. And, even I was trying to search for updates on this story, and I didn't notice it until today. So, it goes to show how, even though these wars continue, just so few people are paying attention. All right, the next one here, Chinese envoy to start peace trip to Ukraine and Russia. So a high-level Chinese envoy is set to begin a trip that will bring him to Russia, Ukraine, and several other European countries as Beijing hopes to broker a ceasefire to bring an end to the fighting in Ukraine. Li Hu, who is China's special representative for Eurasian affairs, he's also going to visit Poland, France, and Germany. So he is a fluent Russian speaker and served as an ambassador to Russia for 10 years until 2019. So the Chinese Foreign Ministry said on Friday, quote, starting from May 15th, special representative of the Chinese government on Eurasian affairs, Li Hu, will travel to Ukraine, Poland, France, Germany, and Russia for communication on a political settlement of the Ukraine crisis, end quote. The ministry added that since the beginning of the war, China has been calling for peace talks and all that. A Ukrainian official told Reuters on Monday that Li will be visiting Ukraine on May 16th and the 17th, so Tuesday and Wednesday, so he could already be there. And his visit is the result of the recent phone call between Zelensky and President Xi. Zelensky has expressed an openness to Beijing's peace push, but still maintains that negotiations cannot happen until Russia withdraws from all the territory it has captured, which is a non-starter for Moscow. Russia maintains that any future peace deal must include recognition of the Ukrainian oblasts that it annexed as Russian territory. So the U.S. has rejected China's efforts to foster negotiations, and they came out against the ceasefire back in March ahead of Xi's trip to Moscow. The White House has cooled the rhetoric since, likely just due to PR, for PR purposes. But the New York Times just recently reported that U.S. officials are wary of any calls for an immediate ceasefire or peace talks. So they're still against the idea of pausing the fighting, of ending the fighting. They want the war to go on. All right, the next one here, the PLA reveals a U.S.-China military encounter off Hong Kong in January 2021. So this is from the South China Morning Post, and it is about a military encounter that apparently happened on January 5th in 2021. So China and the U.S. became locked in an intense military confrontation as close as 150 kilometers from Hong Kong in early 2021, prompting the U.S. to destroy its own floating sonars to prevent them from falling into Beijing's hands. And this is revealed for the first time. And again, this was on January 5th, so they mentioned that it was one day before the January 6th when the Trump supporters entered the Capitol building. So this report says 3 U.S. military aircraft launched a submarine hunt unusually close to China's shoreline. The revelation is contained in the first open report on the January 5th incident, which saw one anti-submarine plane fly as close as 150 kilometers, which is 93 miles, from Hong Kong. And this was released by a team of Chinese military scientists, this report. The report said that the PLA, China's military, was conducting a naval exercise in the area, responded swiftly by sending out a counterforce, the size and nature of which remains classified, not unclassified. So we don't know exactly what happened here, but what they're saying is that the two forces were so close that the U.S. military self-destroyed its floating sonars to prevent the sensitive devices from falling into China's hands. So, this is very concerning. And this is when we talk about this big U.S. military presence, all the activity in the South China Sea near Taiwan now, and the encounters between U.S. and Chinese military vessels and planes, could really spiral out of control one day. So, according to the report, U.S. spy planes deployed sensors in the waters near the Dongsha Islands, which are also known as the Pratas Islands, and they are a group of atolls and reefs under Taiwanese control. The incident was dangerous because any perceived support for Taipei's administration of the islands could be seen as strongly provocative by Beijing, which considers Taiwan as a renegade province to be brought under mainland control by force if necessary. This is definitely sounds like a pretty big incident. And this was around the time that Mark Milley spoke with Chinese military leadership, and he got some heat for that, but maybe this seems like this was probably related because one of those conversations happened on January 8th, which was just 3 days after the incident. So I'll be curious to see if the Pentagon confirms this. I haven't seen confirmation yet from the United States side. But this makes you wonder, how many of these incidents happen that we don't hear about, that aren't publicized. All right. So the next one here is about the Durham report, which I'm sure a lot of people have heard about already. The probe into the FBI's, Russiagate investigation of Trump. And John Durham's final report concludes that the FBI had no verified intel when it opened the probe on Trump. So special counsel John Durham released a damning final report Monday after more than 3 years investigating the Russia collusion probe, declaring that the FBI had no verified intelligence or evidence when it opened the Crossfire Hurricane probe of President Donald Trump's campaign in the summer of 2016. The prosecutor, however, recommended no new criminal charges. So the report said, quote, neither U.S. law enforcement nor the intelligence community appears to have possessed any actual evidence of collusion in their holdings at the commencement of the Crossfire Hurricane investigation. Based on the review of Crossfire Hurricane and related intelligence activities, we conclude that the department and the FBI failed to uphold their important mission of strict fidelity to the law in connection with certain events and activities described in this report. The FBI personnel also repeatedly disregarded important requirements when they continued to seek renewals of that FISA surveillance, while acknowledging then in hindsight that they did not genuinely believe there was probably cause to believe that the target was knowingly engaged in clandestine intelligence activities on behalf of a foreign power, end quote. So pretty damning, it sounds like. And this goes to show, Russiagate was such a big part of, forming public opinion in the United States against Russia over the past, few years. I guess it's been 7 years now since they opened that probe. So this has been going on for a long time, and it just was all based on really nothing. It seems like it's all just nonsense. And again, how much of this it's very related to what's going on today in Ukraine because of all these allegations against Trump and Russia. He had a very hawkish Russia foreign policy, which goes against the whole narrative. But, and he was the first to send the Javelin anti-tank missiles to Ukraine. He tore up the INF treaty. He was no dove when it came to Russia, despite, this whole narrative that he colluded with them. All right. The last one here, this is from the Palestine Chronicle, and I thought it was interesting that the UN commemorated the Palestinian Nakba for the first time. And the Nakba, which translates to the catastrophe, is what the Palestinians refer to. It's the expulsion of 750 Palestinians from their homes by Zionist militias, and thousands were also slaughtered during the Nakba in 1948. So it was the 75th anniversary, and the UN had a statement on it for the first time. So this is, I thought, was significant. I think it shows global opinion, and opinion in the U.S. is, shifting on this whole issue. All right, that's it for the news. Go check out our viewpoints. We have one from Ted Snyder. With upgraded missiles, Ukraine prepares to strike Russian heartland. We also have one from John V. Walsh. The West's economic war on Russia has failed. One from Branko Marchteach. U.S. sanctions are brutal and humane, and they don't work. That's over at Jacobin. One from Michelle Plitnick over at Mondo Weiss. Biden administration quietly backs Israel's deadly assault on Gaza. And one from Belen Fernandez, the forever war on Julian Assange. That's over at Al Jazeera. That is everything for me for today. Our fundraiser, we're still just wrapping things up here, trying to get some last-minute donations. So if you could help us out, go to antiwar.com/donate. We really appreciate all the help. It's how we operate. It's how we get by. You could also just support us by sharing the website, sharing this show. We appreciate all that too. But I'll be back tomorrow with some more news for you. Thanks for listening.